Hello, and welcome to Fear Noir. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently draw you into the darkness, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, let your body relax, and allow the noise of the outside world to slowly fade into silence. Tonight, a story is waiting for you in the dark. So close your eyes, listen carefully, and let yourself drift into Fear Noir. Story 1. It sticks with you, that smell, the sickly sweetness of burnt flesh hanging thick in the summer air, clinging to everything it touches. Late July 2011, I was hired to clear-cut a patch of swampland in a nearby town. Nothing too unusual about that. It is what I do for a living. God, how I wish now that the company contracting my team had been a little more forthcoming in their job description. They must have known about her. How could they not have known? Once our work was done, the land would be bulldozed and paved over for a new suburban shopping center. And so, the cycle of industry rumbles on, crushing everything beneath it. The plot had already been drained, but puddles of sludgy excess still clung stubbornly to recesses in the land, making the terrain a labyrinth of slippery mud traps tucked beneath ancient mossy trees and thorny brush. My team of 12 men and I took one look at the state of it and groaned collectively. It was going to be a long job, we could all tell. For the first few hours, the work itself was going about as smoothly as it could have, given the circumstances. I have been operating machinery for over 20 years now, acting as head on-site technician for 10 of them. I am no stranger to working with rough terrain, muddy water pooling into my work boots, and spiny branches jabbing through my gloves. It comes with the territory when you do this kind of work. Make no mistake, felling cypress trees is a pain in the neck. My guys were having a time of it, trying to topple those ancient, towering giants of the southern swamplands. But I would take every one of those headaches back in a heartbeat now, given the hell I have been through since. I was discussing our route plan with my right-hand man, Dan, when a crack echoed across the worksite. One particularly dead termite-ridden trunk slid down at an unpredictable angle, nearly taking out one of our brush hogs and its operator. Thankfully, it just barely grazed the front of the machine. That massive husk of wood toppled into a nearby pool of murky water, with a deafening crash, thoroughly dousing us all in pure essence of swamp. I quickly identified the catalyst for that particular disaster, Cam, the newbie on the team. He could not have been older than his early 20s, a well-meaning but totally clueless kid. I had hired Cam for his can-do attitude and infectious spirit. In some ways, he reminded me a little of myself at his age, though I had never thought to tell the kid so. Now, he stood frozen in place, hard hat askew, staring at the hollow corpse of the fallen tree. "Are you trying to get us killed?" I shouted, crossing the worksite to meet him. I don't understand," Cam said, his voice uncharacteristically shaky. He swallowed hard and tried again. "I don't understand how it happened. I followed protocol and you nearly crushed one of my valuable employees. Safety regulations aren't a game, son." Cam stared at the ground, kicking a clump of moss with the toe of his boot. "Folks' lives are at stake every day here," I added. "Understood?" He nodded and gave a low, "Sorry, sir," brushing chips of powdery wood from his shoulders. I opened my mouth to really let him have it, but thought better of it. It had been a long day for all of us already, and this was only his first strike. I let him off the hook with a warning. As Cam turned to rejoin the rest of the crew, I caught sight of a dark, spiny clump that stood out against his orange reflective jacket. A large, wicked-looking spider. I did not recognize the species. It clung there with long, spindly, striped legs, its fat yellow and black abdomen twitching back and forth. I brushed it off with a gloved hand, watching the thing hang there for a moment on its nearly invisible thread. After spinning in place for a heartbeat, it began to climb back up into the canopy. Cam turned around with raised eyebrows, bracing for another barrage. "Spider," I said. He gave a nervous laugh and wandered off to help Hank and Luis uproot a stubborn sapling. By the time the sun was setting behind the tree line, turning the sky a deep shade of marmalade, my crew had made a solid dent in the first zone slated for clearing. As the guys were packing up, shutting down the brush cutters and excavator while chatting amongst themselves, Dan jogged up to me with his clipboard. "We've got an issue, Jerry," Dan said, tapping the map drawn up on his board. "The crew thinks our equipment ain't suited for that big bald cypress by the north edge. It's a stubborn old thing." By now, I was worn out from a full day of difficult terrain and mishaps. Sweat ran down my brow, stinging where it reached my eyes. I wiped it away with the back of my glove. "Let's send everyone home then. No point keeping them today if we don't have the tools." Dan agreed, and together we sent the rest of the crew home for the night. One by one, the men removed their gear and trickled off down that dark woodland path until it was just the two of us. I envied the crew. I could not wait to kick back on the couch with a cold can and some leftovers while watching home renovation shows till I passed out. But we had a job to do. The sun hung low on the horizon, washing everything in a soft, dappled red. The cicadas had started up their singing. A barred owl gave its stuttering hoot from somewhere in the darkened woods. All around us, the work site was a torn-up mess of logs and red mud. The machinery sat still and limp, hunched over in the muck like the bodies of dormant beasts, sated from their kill. It was time to go. But first, the cypress. Dan led me to the ancient tree, spray can in hand to mark it for tomorrow's cutting. It was a magnificent thing, stretching up to the heavens, far past any of its brethren in the clearing. Had there been an opening in its base, the two of us could have easily crawled inside, with ample room to spare. Thick, knobby roots sprawled out like limbs, grasping the mud with an obstinance that was almost intimidating. Dan kicked the tree hard. The branches did not even shake. He might as well have been kicking a boulder. I walked up beside him, removing my work gloves. I pressed my bare hand to the bark. It was cool and damp to the touch. "No dry patches at all," said Dan. "No give either. Sturdy as hell. It's old, but it's alive all right." He kicked the base of the tree again, just for good measure. On the second kick, I felt a pinch on my neck, too sharp to be a mosquito. With a shout, I slapped at it, trying to throw off whatever had bitten me. A prickling sensation spread across my fingers. Drawing my hand back, my eyes fixed on the culprit, a spider. Including its oversized spiny legs, the thing filled my entire hand. Its body was large and elongated, spotting those same banded yellow and black patterns stretching across its fat, nickel-sized abdomen. I recognized it as the same species I had seen on Cam's back earlier. For some reason, I did not immediately shake the creature from my hand. I just stared at it, transfixed, as one might be by an exotic flower or surreal work of art. It was oddly beautiful, I thought, in an alien sort of way. "What you got there?" Dan leaned over, inspecting. "Careful now. That's one of those invader species. They're saying those little devils are being planted all up and down the coast to weaken the resolve of the American man with their ancient hypnotic properties. It's some big psyop from the foreign powers overseas. Look it up." I could not tell if he was joking or not. Dan was known for frequenting some questionable Facebook groups. He was always on about some new underground conspiracy, entertaining the crew with outlandish tales of ancient aliens or governmental cover-ups. Examining the massive spider clinging to my hand, I did suspect that Dan was right about the invasive species part. In all my years working in logging, I had never come across anything like it. Before I could respond, Dan smacked the spider from my palm. It landed in the dirt, where he crushed it into a pulp beneath the heel of his boot. It made me oddly sick, seeing black guts ooze out onto the soil, those strange striped legs curling in on themselves. "Better off dead," Dan said with a sharp laugh. My stomach churned unpleasantly. "Well, looks like we'll need the big guns tomorrow. Shall we head home?" By this point, the light had faded almost entirely, casting the wetlands in muted grays and blues and decreasing our visibility. Dan whistled a tune I recognized distantly as St. James Infirmary as we switched on our flashlights and trudged through the sulphurous mud, heading back to the main road where our trucks were parked. The two of us had only been walking down the trail for a few minutes, Dan taking the lead, when he suddenly stumbled forward, cursing and dropping his flashlight as he landed on his stomach. I ran up right away to offer him a hand. He brushed me off, standing up on his own. "You good?" I asked, and Dan just nodded, looking around for what had caused him to lose his balance. What appeared to be a thick white cord had been stretched across the path like a tripwire. It looked sturdy, like climbing rope. As I cast my flashlight beam over it, the surface of the rope almost seemed to glow, wet and sparkling in the dirt. Dan shook his boot, trying to untangle himself from the length of cord which had ensnared him. I wondered vaguely what kind of game hunters would be trying to trap during this season, and with such an elaborate system, the only species that came to mind were deer, wild boars, or the occasional bobcat. I pitched the question to Dan to pass the time. "Hell if I know," he said as he brushed dead leaves from his vest. "Irresponsible is what they are, setting a tripwire across a footpath like that." I agreed, and we fell into steady silence once more, pushing onwards through the dense tunnel of undergrowth. It was pitch black now. We walked beneath the moonless sky, wandering between the massive trunks of cypress trees and live oaks. The path looked so different at night. Surely it had not been this long of a trek to the work site. How had we managed to transport all of the equipment so quickly? This entire operation had been a blur. For a month or so before, money had been tight and fresh jobs had been few and far in between. Naturally, when the phone call came in asking us to tear down a few old trees, I had jumped at the offer. Were we lost? Dan, still ahead of me, had lit a cigarette, taking long drags as he walked. I could see the glowing end of it bobbing up ahead like a tiny red torch. The second-hand smoke wafted back to me. I cleared my throat. "Dan," I said, You think we might have taken a wrong turn? He froze in place, his back still turned to me. The cigarette dropped, fizzling out on the damp leaf litter below. I nearly bumped into him. Dan, my coworker, remained silent, staring into the darkness at the path before us. Up ahead, something screamed. I jumped. The noise was inhuman, a garbled, wet braying, like whatever was emitting the sound had something sharp lodged in its throat. Dan angled his flashlight towards whatever was lurking just beyond the beam. He nudged my shoulder, urging me to look as well. Against my better judgment, I did. Allowing my gaze to follow the trajectory of the beam, my eyes fell upon the body of an animal. A white-tailed deer. The poor thing's body hung suspended at least 5 or 6 feet in the air, its long legs scrambling for purchase on the ground which lay just out of reach. Somehow, it had not yet suffocated. I grabbed my pocket knife and went to free the suffering animal. Dan grabbed my arm. "Are you insane, Jerry?" I looked him in the eye. His jaw was set, a thick sweat beading on his furrowed brow. There was no mistaking it. For perhaps the first time in our long-running career together, Dan looked afraid. The deer bellowed again, writhing and spinning in space. "Whoever set this trap is the crazy one," I whispered back, ripping my arm free from his grasp. "Darn thing is suffering." Despite the way my neck prickled with unease, I ran right up to the twitching animal, trying to avoid stumbling on roots and snake holes. It bucked again as I approached, but I stretched a hand up above its neck, grabbing the top of the rope to hold it steady. I could feel the doe's hot breath blowing against my face in puffs as I began to hack away at the rope with my knife. Wide, blank eyes fixed upon me pleadingly as I worked. After a minute or so of sawing at the cording, I had barely made a dent. Again and again, I tried to score the rope, but it held tight. As I opened my mouth to report this to Dan, I heard him give a sort of alarmed yelp. I peered past the struggling animal I was desperately trying to save, angling my flashlight in Dan's direction, just in time to see him slip onto his side as if pulled by unseen hands. I heard the crunch of his body as it hit a clump of roots. He lay there unceremoniously for a moment, groaning in pain. Then, like a rag doll, my coworker was dragged upwards by the legs. All at once his body was torn from the ground and scooped into the darkened trees. There was no impact sound as he left the beam of my light, just an empty, terrible silence. I stood there watching, unmoving, speechless. The doe, becoming agitated again, began to twist once more, letting that horrible, stuttering scream echo through the pitch-black swamp. Snapping back to my senses, I lunged towards the place where Dan had disappeared, only for an excruciating, stinging sensation to jolt through my palm where I had gripped the rope to steady my blade. Each time I pulled, the stinging roared to a searing pain. My hand was stuck to the rope. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, panic flaring. The doe continued its wretched bleating as I tried again to wrench my hand loose from that strange silken rope. On the third try, my hand came free. My palm did not. I heard and felt the unmistakable ripping of my own flesh as the top layer of skin liberated itself from the pads of my fingers. Bleeding but too adrenaline-filled to bother, I booked it to the spot where I had seen Dan being swept into the trees. Steeling myself, I gripped the flashlight in my good hand and angled it up into the canopy. The bright white of the beam illuminated Dan's pale, sweat-drenched face inches from mine. I shouted aloud, nearly dropping the light. His eyes were closed. He was still hanging, serenely swinging in place, just as the deer had been. The shock of his ascent seemed to have knocked him unconscious. Examining his limp body, I caught sight of that same luminous, glittering rope ensnaring his left leg in thick coils. Whatever happened, I was not touching that stuff again. Instead, I grabbed both of Dan's arms and pulled. The rope had some give, or else whatever it was attached to bowed slightly as I tried in vain to yank my friend free. "Come on, son of a..." I pulled with my entire body weight, only letting up when I heard something in Dan's shoulder pop. Sore, bruised, and bloody, I paused in my work to stare up at the endless canopy. I felt something like guilt for Dan's shoulder, probably, or else for bringing us into these cursed woods to begin with. I did not know. I just wanted to go home. Something dripped from Dan's peaceful face onto mine. Sweat, I thought at first. It was strangely sweet, cloyingly so, like the scent of some strange fruit or flower. Dan's arms were sticky, too. As I went to adjust my grip, my hands began to sting again. No, not him too. But sure enough, my hands were stuck to the surface of his skin, as if glued in place with extra-strength epoxy. An acidic, prickling pain shot through my fingers, and yet I could not tear away without risking more pain for the both of us. I could not leave him here. I could not leave this swamp on my own. But we could not both stay here. As I considered my options, a low creaking began, like the sound of branches bending in the wind. I froze, listening. Next came a rhythmic click, click, click. It was almost metallic in nature, absolutely foreign. It was coming from above us, there, up past Dan's body, mostly buried in the darkness of the branches. I spotted movement. I forced my eyes to focus, using what little light was cast from my discarded flashlight to pick out the figure above us. It was huge, whatever it was, causing branches to bend and creak in its wake. The surface of the swollen shape was smooth and ever so slightly shiny. End to end, the abdomen easily eclipsed the size of my work truck. I was transfixed, mouth open, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would give out. It began to crawl. The thing in the trees advanced in a perfect vertical line downwards, head first. I could not look away. It grew closer, closer, until the light caught on more of its features. A crooked nose, a slack, open mouth, a pale, bare chest that glowed silver in the artificial light. I could not see the rest of it from this angle, but as each detail solidified before me, all I could think was that this form was absolutely wrong. My humanity rejected it instinctively. I now believe that the devil and his kin do walk this earth in the flesh. There is no other explanation. Plain and simple. It smiled. Or tried to. I was reminded of rotting jack-o'-lanterns withering on the porch. Then Dan and I were both ripped into the canopy, leaves and vines scraping our faces, as we were lifted up towards that horrible grinning visage floating in the dark. On the way up, I think my head collided with a branch. My vision went white. The night gets a little fuzzy from that moment on. Forgive me. My head throbbed. My ears rang. With both our flashlights long discarded, my eyes began to clear, adjusting to the darkness. What I saw before me makes me wish I had lost my vision entirely. The trees were all draped in so much cobweb that it looked like yards of lace tablecloth, stretched and folded over themselves. The stuff blanketed every surface in a false floor of silk. 1,000 tiny threads tickled my skin. I wondered vaguely what sort of many-legged creatures had found their way into my hair and clothes. Strange bulbous lumps of debris were heaped around me, some swaying gently from higher branches. I counted almost a dozen. At the center of the mess was it. It could have been a human woman, almost. The torso and head were right, if you squinted. Graceful and harsh in profile with long, straight black hair. The face was beautiful, but dead and empty, cracked across its nose and mouth like a porcelain mask. I was reminded of insects with their false eyes, mimicking the world around them to increase their odds of winning the evolutionary lottery. Deception was a means of survival. Around the midsection, the pale torso gave way to something smooth and shiny, like shellac, that ballooned outward into a pulsing dome. It was the twitching abdomen of what could only be a spider. From that same center point of connection, long barbed legs sprouted outwards, clinging to the webbing effortlessly. I beheld her, the owner of the false eyes. I could barely breathe. Her human torso was doubled over at the waist, her legs gripping a man's body. I called out for Dan, but as the limp head lolled into view, I realized that it was not him. It was Cam. They were all wrapped up together. The creature leaned forward and pressed its mouth to his, coaxing his lips open. The act looked like a kiss. I could not understand it. Wish I never did. The noise. God, the noise. A gulping, slow and grotesque, like a carton of thick soup being emptied out into a pot, and a crackling that could only be meat tearing from bone. No, not a kiss, a seal. I watched as the body of Cam deflated. I could see the hollowed-out bag of his flesh sinking inward, devoid of fluid, a sort of sick reverse CPR. My stomach heaved and fought against me, threatening to turn itself inside out. I could not help but remember the last conversation I had had with the kid, chewing him out for an honest mistake. I thought that we would work plenty of jobs together. He would have time to learn, to grow. And now we were going to die side by side in this hellhole. I still have not forgiven myself. All these years later, don't think I ever will. Once it had finished its meal, the creature encased the dehydrated corpse in thick coating of fresh webbing from its spinneret before discarding the parcel thoughtlessly with a back leg. It just left Cam's body there, a pale and empty husk that barely resembled anything human. I watched it fall to rest beside a lump of debris that could only be another corpse, mummified in its gauzy prison. The second corpse also wore a familiar reflective jacket. I did not want it to be true. It could not be. I looked up, scanning the web for what I knew I would find. 12 bodies, 12 men. My team. I keep retracing the steps of my life, everything that led me to that night. At the time, I did not feel as though I had had many other options. I told my first wife once that I burned every relationship I touched. She said nothing, didn't disagree. Divorced twice, thoroughly convinced I was never deserving of a happy ending. I did what I could to make ends meet. Took up a clear-cutting gig, spent more time understanding heavy machinery than people. And that was that. In this final moment, several thoughts occupied my mind. If this is the end, management will replace me tomorrow. If I make it through, at least I will get a cold beer. But who will I be when this is all over? The woman spider was approaching, head first, her placid face gentle and welcoming but hungry around its jagged edges. I struggled against the web. An icy hot pain shot through my muscles as I did, numbing and immobilizing every limb. Did I ever live as I wanted? She got closer. I was paralyzed, my breathing shallow. My throat began to constrict. The cold and smiling disk of her face was nearly pressed to mine. I took a deep gulp of the rancid air and choked out, "What have I done to you?" The woman spider stopped. It stared with empty eyes. Its mouth hung open unnaturally on its jaw hinge, a black void yawning open inside. It gave a shuddering wheeze, its vocal cords shredding together like a broken fiddle. I felt so stupid for even trying to communicate with something so alien. Still, I persisted. "Where did you come from?" It did speak, not with its voice, but through the web. The vibrations filled my skull, rattling my senses, until it distilled into the notion of language. "Far away." "You're invasive?" "How can I be called invader? It was men like you who took me away from home. I thought this place could be home, but you are taking it too." My head was throbbing. Every ounce of my being was inundated with emotion that was not my own. I miss my trees. I miss my children. Where are they? An overwhelming sorrow filled my ribcage. I nearly wept. I did not know why. What did I have to be sorry for? Especially to this monster. The beautiful rotten clay face began to split open along a seam, to reveal sharp mouth parts, dripping with strings of drool. "I mean you no harm." I tried, desperate to prolong the conversation, if it could be called that. "You lie." I could smell the curdled blood of my former colleagues on her lips. The scent hit the back of my throat in waves, making me gag. Tears welled up in the corners of my eyes. The air was humid and rank. My vision swam. "I'm so sorry. It shouldn't have to be this way." I realized I meant it. 8 glossy black eyes readjusted. I could feel the ancient weight of their gaze upon me. Suddenly, I smelled smoke and burning flesh. The creature shrieked and hissed, jerking away from me. Her abdomen was on fire. The entire web was going up in flames. I looked desperately for the source of the blaze and found it. Dan lay a few paces away from me, his limbs bound in web. He looked badly beaten and delirious, but when I noticed him, he gave a smile. In one barely exposed hand, he gripped his trusty cigarette lighter. The thick ropes of web carried the flame up and across like tinder. The woman spider thrashed and howled, a sound which pierced my heart in some incomprehensible way. As that glistening arachnoid body crackled and swelled in the heat, her jaws flashed open once more. "Get the hell out of here," Dan shouted over the roar of the flames. As he did, those massive mandibles snapped shut for the final time. Dan fell silent. The last thing I saw as the flames licked away my bindings were 8 massive black legs curling inward around a charred, empty body. Finally free, I hurled myself away from the spreading heat, crashing into the trees below. I managed to grab hold of a supple branch on the way down, somewhat breaking my fall, but landed hard on my ankle. I heard something pop, too charged with adrenaline to care. I bolted into the darkness, my uniform still smoldering, slipping on wet leaves as shocks of pain coursed through my leg. I sprinted until my lungs ached for air, tasting nothing but smoke and blood in the back of my raw throat. At some point in that sleepless night, I must have found the main path again, because I remember making it back to my truck as dawn was breaking through the trees. Dan's truck was parked at an angle a few yards away, empty and sprinkled with fallen oak leaves. I sat there staring at that empty truck for a good long minute. Before I drove from those godforsaken woods for the last time, I opened the cooler in my back seat. I cracked open a cold beer and set it in the bed of Dan's truck. "You weren't right about most things," I said, "but neither was I. Take it easy." It seemed like the thing to do. I drove home. Story 2. I recently went on vacation at a beach house in South Carolina. Living up north, I don't get out to walk along beaches much, so I decided to grab a flashlight and head outside to look for shells, sand dollars, and maybe take pictures of any animals roaming around at night. What I was not expecting was to take a picture of something almost alien in nature. So I was shining my flashlight at the shoreline, looking for any shells or rocks washing up on shore, when all of a sudden I shine my light on this black sludge. I walk past for a moment, not even paying attention, my brain not even registering that I had just seen something so disturbing. Then my brain processes what I saw. I suppose it took me a second to even realize there was something there. Maybe it was because of how disgusting the thing was that my mind rejected it at first. It was a black, sludgy, bubbling goop with claws and legs of multiple different crustaceans sticking out at odd angles. It was deeply disturbing to look at, but I thought it may have just been some unfortunate meal for a bigger sea creature. But what irked me the wrong way was that it was also sparsely hairy, and the legs seemed to flinch, as the claws, likewise, seemed to pinch, almost like it was alive. This amorphous sludge, which had to have been around 12 feet in diameter, filled with what would aptly be described as the remains of an orca's all-you-can-eat crustacean buffet, was only around 10 or so feet behind me. Obviously, I was not going to get a closer look, but I think some may have gotten on my shoe as I was walking past. The bottom of my left shoe has a deep black stain that I cannot scrub out no matter how hard I try. Anyway, I looked at the hideous black sludge for a couple minutes, just to retain memory of what I was seeing, before I turned around and started walking back, making a big arc around this thing to make sure I would not get too close. Unfortunately, after I was past it and started walking back to my vacation home, I turned around out of curiosity, and I swear I saw this thing's legs touch the ground and start to scuttle back into the sea, the goo sloshing along the sand like some nightmare-made flesh. After a couple more steps, I made a double take, and it was gone. During my walk back, I started to notice all these dead seagulls lying on the beach, decaying bodies scattered across the sand, yet leaking out of any openings in their corpses seemed to be that very same black sludge, bubbly and hairy, all the same. Looking back at it, I am glad I had not gotten any closer to that thing on the shore. I did not go into the ocean for the rest of that vacation. Instead, I spent time in the pool, where it hopefully could not reach. The morning after my encounter, all the dead animals were gone, as was the black sludge. There was a thick, gray fog rolling in from the sea. However, I still wonder if it had something to do with the black sludge I had seen the night before. I have tried to tell others about what I saw, including the NOAA, but after filing a report, they responded telling me it was likely pollution and that they would look into it. I never got another response from them. Most people, I told, believed I may have just been tired, seeing algae or sea foam covering crabs, and that the decay and the stain on my shoe were all just coincidence. I do not believe what everyone is telling me. I think that thing was alive, an undiscovered creature, perhaps from deep on the sea floor where light never reaches. I am going back in a week. I cannot rest until I know for sure if I saw something real. I am going to try to get some photos and video of it. I just hope it shows again, though part of me is terrified of what I might find. The week leading up to my return trip dragged on endlessly. I could not stop thinking about that thing on the beach. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those twitching legs, heard the wet sloshing sound it made as it moved. I kept checking the stain on my shoe, as if it might have disappeared, but it remained stubbornly there, a reminder that what I saw was real. I told my wife I was going back for work, which was not entirely a lie. I work remotely anyway, so it did not matter where I was. She gave me a strange look, but did not question it. I think she could tell something was bothering me, but I could not bring myself to tell her the truth. How could I explain that I was obsessed with a blob of living sludge I saw on a beach? When I finally arrived back at the beach house, it was late afternoon. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the sand. The beach looked normal, peaceful even. Families were packing up their things, kids running around, laughing. It was hard to believe that just a week ago, I had seen something so horrifying in this same spot. I waited until it was fully dark before I ventured out. I brought my phone, a better flashlight, and a camera with night vision capabilities. I even brought a small shovel, though I was not sure what I would do with it. I just felt like I needed something, some way to interact with the thing if I found it again. The beach was empty when I stepped out onto the sand. The sound of the waves was rhythmic and calming, but it did nothing to ease my nerves. My heart was pounding as I made my way toward the spot where I had seen the creature. I swept my flashlight back and forth across the sand, looking for any sign of it. For the first hour, I found nothing, just shells, seaweed, the occasional crab scuttling away from my light. I was starting to think that maybe everyone was right, that I had been tired and had seen something mundane that my exhausted brain had transformed into something monstrous. Then I smelled it. It was faint at first, just a hint of something rotten on the breeze. But as I walked further down the beach, it grew stronger. A sickly sweet smell mixed with something that reminded me of sulfur. My stomach churned, but I pressed on, following the smell like it was a trail. And then I saw it. It was bigger than before, maybe 15 feet across now. The black sludge bubbled and writhed, and in the beam of my flashlight, I could see dozens of legs and claws sticking out at various angles, twitching and grasping at nothing. The hair I had seen before was more prominent now, thick black strands that seemed to wave in a breeze I could not feel. I stood there frozen, my flashlight trained on the thing. Part of me wanted to run, to get as far away from it as possible, but another part of me, the part that had driven me to come back here, needed to know what it was. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and started recording. I made sure to get clear shots of the creature from multiple angles. The whole time those legs kept moving, kept twitching, like the thing was aware of my presence. but did not care. Then something happened that made my blood run cold. The sludge started to shift, to move toward me. It was slow, almost imperceptible at first, but definitely deliberate. The legs on the side closest to me began to dig into the sand, pulling the mass forward inch by inch. I took a step back, then another. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. The creature continued to advance, leaving a dark trail in the sand behind it. That is when I noticed something else. More dead birds. They were scattered around the area, just like before. Seagulls mostly, but I also saw what looked like a pelican and a few smaller shorebirds. And just like before, black sludge was leaking from their eyes, their beaks, any opening it could find. I zoomed in with my camera on one of the dead birds and immediately wished I had not. The sludge was not just leaking out, it was moving, pulsing, like it had a heartbeat of its own. And in the center of the puddle beneath the bird, I could see something forming, something that looked almost like an eye. That was enough for me. I turned and ran, my feet sinking into the soft sand, making every step feel like I was running through mud. Behind me, I could hear a wet, dragging sound, the sound of that thing pursuing me. I did not dare look back. I made it to the house and slammed the door behind me, locking it even though I knew a lock would do nothing against something like that. I stood there panting, my back pressed against the door, waiting for any sign that it had followed me. Nothing. The night passed in agonizing slowness. I did not sleep. I just sat on the couch, staring at the door, jumping at every sound. When morning finally came, I mustered the courage to look outside. The beach was empty. No black sludge, no dead birds, just clean sand and gentle waves. It was like nothing had happened at all. But I had the video. I had proof. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the footage. It was all there, clear as day. The massive blob of sludge, the twitching legs, the dead birds with black ooze leaking from them. I even had footage of it moving toward me, though it was shaky because of how badly my hands were trembling. I uploaded the video to my computer and sent it to the NOAA again, along with a detailed description of what I had seen. I also sent it to a few marine biology professors whose email addresses I found online. I even posted it on a few forums dedicated to unexplained phenomena. The responses I got were mixed. Most people thought it was fake, a clever bit of special effects, or some kind of hoax. A few suggested it might be a bloom of some kind of bioluminescent organism, or a rare type of bacterial mat. One person suggested it might be a mass of dead jellyfish that had washed ashore and decomposed into that black goo. But none of those explanations felt right. None of them explained the movement, the way it seemed to deliberately pursue me. None of them explained the dead birds, or the fact that the whole thing disappeared by morning. One response stood out, though. It came from a professor of marine biology at a university I had never heard of. His email was brief but intriguing. What you have documented appears to be a colony organism of unknown origin. I would very much like to study your footage in more detail. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. I did contact him, and we set up a video call for the following day. His name was Dr. Nathaniel Pierce, and he looked to be in his 60s, with gray hair and tired eyes that suggested he had seen more than his share of strange things. Thank you for reaching out. he said once we were connected. "I have reviewed your footage several times, and I must say, it is quite extraordinary." "Do you know what it is?" I asked, unable to keep the desperation out of my voice. He leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. "I have a theory, though I must warn you, it is not a pleasant one." "I am listening," I said. "What you encountered may be what we call a colonial organism," he explained. "Think of it like a Portuguese man-o'-war, which is not a single creature, but a colony of specialized polyps working together. But what you have documented appears to be something far more complex and far more aggressive." "Where did it come from?" I asked. "That is the troubling part," Dr. Pierce said. "I believe it came from the deep ocean, possibly from hydrothermal vents, where we have only recently begun to explore. There are ecosystems down there that operate on principles entirely different from what we see at the surface. Some organisms down there are extremophiles, capable of surviving in conditions that would kill anything else." "But why would it come to the surface?" I asked. "That is what concerns me most," he said. "If it is coming to the surface, it may be because conditions in the deep are changing, forcing it to seek new environments, or it may be expanding its range deliberately." The implications of that made my skin crawl. "What do?" I asked. "For now, avoid the beach at night," Dr. Pierce said. "I am going to share your footage with some colleagues and see if we can identify the organism more precisely. In the meantime, if you see it again, do not approach it. We do not know if it is toxic or if it poses other dangers." I agreed, though I had no intention of going anywhere near that thing again if I could help it. After the call ended, I sat in silence, trying to process everything. The idea that there were things in the ocean, things we knew nothing about, things that could come onto land and hunt, was terrifying. I decided to cut my trip short and head home the next day. I had what I came for. I had proof that I was not crazy, that what I saw was real. But that night, I made a mistake. I could not sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of the creature and what it might be. Around midnight, I heard a sound outside, a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the sand, against every instinct screaming at me not to. I went to the window and looked out. It was there, right outside the house. The black sludge had spread across the sand like a carpet, and in the moonlight I could see it pulsing, moving, breathing almost. The legs sticking out of it were no longer just from crustaceans. I could see what looked like fish fins, bird talons, even what might have been mammal bones. And then I saw the eyes, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the surface of the sludge. They were not all the same. Some were large and bulbous, like fish eyes. Others were small and beady, like bird eyes. But they were all looking at the house, looking at me. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I grabbed my phone and called Dr. Pierce, not caring that it was the middle of the night. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy. "Hello, it is here," I said, my voice shaking. "It is right outside the house." There was a pause, then his voice became sharp and alert. "Do not go outside. Lock all the doors and windows. I am going to make some calls." "What is it doing?" I asked, even though I was not sure I wanted to know. "I think it is hunting," he said quietly. "Stay inside. Do not let it know you are there. But it was too late for that. It already knew. As I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A tapping sound. Light at first, then growing louder. It was coming from the door. Tap, tap, tap. Something was knocking. Do you hear that? I whispered into the phone. Do not answer it. Dr. Pierce said urgently, whatever you do, do not open that door. The tapping continued, rhythmic and patient. Then it stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then I heard it, at the window. The same tapping, but this time I could see what was making the sound. One of the legs, a large crab claw, was tapping against the glass. Behind it, I could see the mass of sludge pressed against the window. Those hundreds of eyes staring at me. It is at the window now, I said, my voice barely audible. The house is secure? Dr. Pierce asked. I think so, I said. Then it cannot get in, he said, though he did not sound entirely convinced. Just wait it out. I have made some calls. Help is coming. Help is coming. Those words should have comforted me, but they did not. What kind of help could possibly deal with something like this? The tapping at the window continued through the night. Sometimes it would stop for a while, and I would dare to hope it had left. But then it would start again, always at a different window, like it was testing each one, looking for a way in. I spent the night huddled in the center of the living room, as far from the windows as I could get, watching the doors and windows, waiting for the glass to break or the wood to splinter. But it never did. When morning came, the tapping finally stopped. I waited another hour before I dared to look outside. The beach was empty again. Clean sand, gentle waves, no sign that anything had been there. But I knew better now. I knew it was still out there, somewhere in the ocean, waiting for night to fall again. Doc Pierce called me later that morning. I have spoken with some colleagues, he said. We are organizing a team to investigate, but I need you to leave that area immediately. It is not safe. I did not need to be told twice. I packed my things and left within the hour, driving north without stopping until I was several states away. But even now, back in my own home, far from the ocean, I cannot shake the feeling that something is wrong. The stain on my shoe is still there, and sometimes, late at night, I swear I can smell that sickly sweet scent of rot and sulfur. And worst of all, sometimes I see things in the dark, shapes moving at the edge of my vision, eyes watching from the shadows. I think it followed me home. Or maybe there are more of them than we ever realized, hiding in the deep places of the ocean, waiting for the right time to emerge. I am writing this as a warning. If you ever see black sludge on a beach, if you ever smell that sweet rotting smell, if you ever see dead animals leaking black ooze, get away from there as fast as you can. And whatever you do, do not let it touch you, because I think the stain on my shoe is spreading. Story 3. Reed had attached a black and white photograph to his email. The photo showed an impossibly tall man with feathered wings standing on stage in a circus tent, surrounded by horrified onlookers. I checked the photo for signs of manipulation, but I did not see any evidence it had been altered. The man had been shackled to the stage floor. He was so thin his rib cage pressed through his skin like the bars of a prison. This man vanished in 1922, Reed told me in the email. I need help finding out what happened to him. Reed was a cloud data entrepreneur worth around $3 billion. In the news, I read that he had recently been diagnosed with terminal liver cancer. I wondered if he was still in his right mind after receiving such a devastating diagnosis. I called the number in his email signature. His secretary answered, and then scheduled a meeting for me and Reed later that week. I met Reed at his office downtown. He sat at his desk, but stood to shake my hand when I entered. He looked sick, thin, and frail. He had lost all his hair. His handshake was firm, though, and he still had his confident salesman's smile that I recognized from business magazine covers. The famous Red Primara, he said. I just go by Vadim now. How did they catch you? I have always wanted to know. The FBI hid a canary token inside a server I had broken into. When I used the token, it leaked my IP address back to them. Did the FBI know you were coming? I have always thought they did. So far, I have not been able to figure out who tipped them off, though. My partner, Alexei, did 2 years in federal prison. I did 15. Now, I strictly do white hat work only. Then he sat at his desk again and turned his computer monitor toward me so I could see. On the screen was an old newspaper article from the Bismarck Tribune, dated October 1922. The performer whose picture I sent you went by the name Chezakiel, Reed told me. He performed as part of a traveling circus called Marchetti's Palace of Wonders. The owner of the circus, Ignazio, claimed Chezakiel was one of the watchers from the Book of Enoch. What is the Book of Enoch? An old religious text that claims there was a group of angels who abandoned heaven to sleep with human women. The women who became pregnant gave birth to hideous giants called Nephilim. Reed scrolled through the newspaper article. It described the different performers: a sword swallower, a strong man, a fortune teller with milk-white eyes, and then Chezakiel, the angel, the same picture I had seen before. Chezakiel was the circus's star attraction, Reed told me. Stories about him spread all over the USA and eventually reached the ear of a railroad tycoon named Threll. Threll was obsessed with the occult. He was also a practicing hermeticist who sought to use the metaphysical world to control physical reality. He hired a Pinkerton detective to travel to North Dakota and find out if the stories about Chezakiel were true. The detective arrived in North Dakota, but never made it back to Threll. The Pinkertons sent a few more detectives to North Dakota to look for this missing detective, but they could not find him. But they did learn that Chezakiel had disappeared too, and nobody ever found out what happened to them. That is where the story gets stranger. In the late 1980s, this picture was posted to a BBS conspiracy board. It shows an angel lying on an operating table in some kind of medical lab. Reed opened the picture. The angel looked just like Chezakiel. His head was shaved, his wings had been mutilated, and his flesh was covered with surgical scars. I have seen things on the dark web that would put most people in therapy. Cartel executions, freak accidents, exploitation rings. I have learned to look at horror like data, separating the facts from the suffering. But this picture of Chezakiel made my stomach turn. The person who leaked this photo claimed they worked at Parallax, a genetics company founded by Threll's grandson. So, You think the Thrells have had Chazakiel locked up somewhere this whole time? Reed leaned across his desk, his eyes intense, despite his weakened state. Threll's grandson was a heavy smoker. He was around my age when he was diagnosed with lung cancer. I have a few friends who know him. They say he managed to cure his cancer. They say he has stopped aging, too. I knew it all sounded crazy. I knew Reed was probably out of his mind. Work had been slow, though, and Reed's contract was generous. I told him I would look into parallax and see what I could find. For the next 3 days, I searched archived Reddit and 4chan threads, old forum sites like Godlike Productions and Lunatic Outpost, and Tor sites like Dread and Dark Forums. On an archived alt.conspiracy Usenet chain, someone calling themselves Null Sequence claimed they were the one who had first posted the Parallax Angel photo. Their email was nullsequence@netcom.com. I took a chance and tried to email the address. "Did you take this picture?" I asked, and I attached a copy of it. I had nearly given up on them when, 2 weeks later, they wrote me back with an invite to join a Signal chat group. I joined. "Who are you?" they asked. "My name is Vadium. I am a private investigator. I have been hired to look into Parallax's angel experiments. Send me a picture of your face with your driver's license beside it." I did not like to give strangers copies of my ID cards, but I did not have any other leads. I needed to know what they did. I could always get a new driver's license if I had to. I sent them the picture. An hour later, they called me. A woman spoke. "You are not working for Parallax, are you?" Just for someone they have screwed over. They have screwed over a lot of people. "How long ago did you work for them?" I did not. My father, Jose, did. He is Null Sequence. He worked at Parallax from 1986 until he was found dead in his apartment on June 5th, 1992. How did he die? The police said it was a heroin overdose, but he had never touched heroin in his life. He hated drugs. He would not even take Tylenol when he had a headache. Did your father tell you anything about what Parallax was working on? They called it Project Nephilim. They were trying to sequence the angel's DNA. They thought his DNA held all kinds of secrets, and if they could map it, they would unlock the truth about the universe. She paused. My father had more pictures. He kept a journal too. I can send you everything, but on one condition. What is that? If you find proof that Parallax killed my father, you need to give it to me. I agreed. She sent me the photos and a text file containing her father's journal entries. In the new photos, Chazakiel's body had been even more mutilated. Wires had been embedded in his arms and chest. Plastic tubes sucked the blood from his veins, transferring it into test tubes. In a journal entry dated January 14, 1992, Jose wrote, "I managed to get a camera into the basement of the New Mexico lab and take a few pictures. I do not know where Parallax found these surgeons. They cannot speak English, just Italian. They took 6 vials of blood out of the angel and then sent them upstairs to Gideon, our ontological geneticist." Jose's final entry was dated June 2, 1992. In it he wrote, "Gideon thinks Threll has lost his mind. Threll thinks the angel wants revenge. He wants to keep it chained up in the lab forever, or at least for as long as he is still alive." I called Reed and told him what I had learned. This is great work," he said. "Now we just need to get you into that lab building. I am working on it." Work faster. Searching through New Mexico real estate listings, I learned the old Parallax lab building had been put up for sale by its new owner, a company called Ophidia Global. I called Reed and asked if he could get me a tour of the building. He called me back the next day and said the tour had already been scheduled. I got on a plane to New Mexico. During the flight, I had a strange dream. Chazakiel leaned over me, smiling in my face, while his wings flapped behind his back. I stared up at his hideous smile, frozen, unable to move, unable to scream. He ran his long, bony fingers over my face. "I am waiting for you, Vadim," he said. I woke as the plane landed, covered in sweat. I took a cab to my hotel. I spent the night looking through pictures of the old lab, trying to figure out where Threll might have Chazakiel hidden. The next morning, I met the realtor, Katie, at the building. She looked like a typical suburban mom. Curly blonde hair. She wore a black blazer. She shook my hand and asked me how long I had worked for Reed. "About 2 years," I said. "What is he planning to do in New Mexico?" "I really cannot say anything. Reed wants to keep this project quiet." She said she understood, and then she brought me inside the Parallax lab. The first floor was filled with cubicle dividers. Gray carpet covered the floor. Gray blinds covered the windows. "It is really a great building," she told me. "Lots of space, lots of potential." "The building has been empty since Parallax shut down?" "Yes. Ophidia Global acquired the building recently, but they have not been able to find a buyer yet." "The building has been on the market a while, has not it?" "Unfortunately, there used to be some rumors going around that this building is haunted." She led me past the cubicles. "The building is still in very good shape, though," she said. "The owners send cleaners in every 2 weeks. They have kept the place in very good condition." "Do you think I could see the basement?" "I am not supposed to take people down there." "Why not?" "The cleaners do not get to it as often. I would really like to see it. Reed is going to need a space to set up his server racks. I guess I could show it to you quickly." She brought me downstairs and flipped the light switch. Fluorescent tube lights lit up the concrete hallway. "The furnace room is on your right," she told me. "Then next to it is a storage room you might be able to use for servers or whatever other kind of equipment Reed needs to put in here." At the end of the hallway, I noticed a metal door. "Where does that door go?" "I have no idea. I would need to ask the Thrells." I tried to open the door, but it was locked. The handle felt strangely warm. I began to feel dizzy, and I knelt on the floor. The room spun around me. My vision blurred. For a moment, I saw Chazakiel sitting in a cage inside a circus tent. A man in a suit and a hat stood next to him. "Ignacio keeps his keys underneath his pillow," Chazakiel said. "He drank an entire bottle of rum tonight. Just reach under his pillow and take the keys. He will not wake up. And if I free you, you promise you will come back to California with me? There is nowhere else I would rather be." Chazakiel smiled, his lips stretching across his face. Katie put her hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" "I am fine. Sorry, I just lost my balance for a second. It is the air down here. It is very dusty. We should go back upstairs." I agreed. I followed her back upstairs. "So, what do you think?" she asked me. The building has a lot of potential. I really need to talk to Mr. Reed first, though, before I can say anything else. Of course. As soon as you do, please let me know what he thinks. We shook hands and said goodbye to each other. Then I went back into the city and rented a van. I drove around and bought everything I would need to get through that metal door. A bolt cutter, a flashlight, a 20V drill, and a big pack of tungsten carbide-tipped drill bits. I drove back to the lab at midnight. I shut off the building's alarm, got through the front entrance, and then made my way back down to the basement, where I started drilling out the metal door's keyway. The first drill bit lasted 4 minutes before it broke. I looked over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that somebody was watching me. I put in the second bit and kept drilling. Burning hot metal shavings sprayed across my hands, but I ignored the pain. The drill hit the security pins and kicked sideways, but I grabbed onto it and held it tighter. Sweat dripped down my face. Dull pain spread through my forearms. The second drill bit broke, and I put in the third. The third bit finally got the door open. Behind the door, concrete stairs led deeper underground. I looked over my shoulder again, and then I turned on my flashlight and followed the stairs down into the sub-basement. I came out into a lab filled with metal tables, overturned chairs, and computer monitors with shattered screens. Surgical instruments lay scattered across the floor. The counters were covered with broken syringes. In the next room, someone moaned, "Hello," I yelled, but no answer. I walked through the lab, into the adjacent room. An enormous shadow stretched across the back wall. I raised my flashlight. I nearly dropped it on the floor when I saw him. Chazakil, his arms outstretched, his legs pressed together, as if he had been crucified. I thought I had prepared myself to see him. I thought I would be fine, but my brain struggled to process the fact that he was real, not just a photograph anymore. My legs buckled. The longer I looked at him, the more horrific the scene became. His body had been embedded into the wall. His hands, feet, and shoulders had been pinned to the wall with steel bolts. Thousands of wires entered every part of his body. Some were thin, others were thick cables. The wires connected his body to junction boxes mounted on the walls. What remained of his wings spread out behind him. Most of the feathers had been plucked out. In the gaps between the feathers, the veins of the membrane pulsed. He slowly raised his head and locked his eyes with mine. Another memory entered my head. Threll's grandson knelt on the floor in tears. "What have you done to me?" Chazakil looked down at him from the wall. "I have given you everything you ever wanted. You have cursed me." Chazakil's voice brought me out of the dream. "You found me, Vadim." The same smile from my dream. "Are you in pain?" I asked him. "I have suffered worse. Now, are you going to save me? Take me to see Reed?" "How do you know about Reed?" "I know everything that happens next. Everything that Reed wants from me." "But what do you want, Vadim?" "I do not want anything from you. You want to know who betrayed you. I will tell you if you free me. I promise I will not hurt you." So, I was betrayed then. I knew it. I had always wanted the name. I had always wanted the truth. I picked up the bolt cutter and cut the steel bolts. Chazakil stepped forward from the wall. The wires stretched and then began snapping. Chazakil leaned forward, bringing his face toward mine. It was Alexei, he told me. Of course, it had always been so obvious. He had made the mistake, not me. He must have hacked that crypto exchange, even after I had warned him not to, and then gotten caught just like I had warned him he would. To save himself, he had traded my life for his. All the tears, all the times he had visited me in prison, trying to cheer me up. I laughed. I would make sure I paid him back. Before I died, I would make sure he suffered just like I had. Chazakiel lifted me off the ground. "What are you doing?" I yelled. His mouth widened, his jaw unhinged with the crack of splitting bone. Then, the lower half dropped to his chest. Inside his widening mouth, I saw a cave of pale-ribbed flesh. "Stop." He swallowed me whole, like a snake devouring a rat. My eyes filled with darkness. Knives stabbed into my shoulder blades. The pain spread down my spine. My veins squirmed like worms against my muscles. I began bleeding from every part of my body. Soon, my clothes were soaked with blood. Again and again, my veins emptied and then soaked up fresh blood. I screamed in agony, begging Chazakiel to make the torture stop. I do not know how long it went on for, hours or days. But then I woke up on the floor. Black blood dripped from my mouth. My clothes were soaked with black blood too. My body ached. Chazakiel hovered over me, the same black blood dripping from his mouth. "What did you do to me?" I asked. He turned and walked down the hallway. "Where are you going?" I yelled. I ran after him, but I became dizzy, and I leaned against the wall to steady myself. Outside, I found Chazakiel in the back of the van, waiting for me. "Take me to Reed now," he said. I called Reed and asked him where he wanted me to go. Reed gave me the address for a warehouse in Northern California. I drove all night, 15 hours, only stopping for gas. I felt relieved to be done with Reed and with chasing after missing angels. I got back to work on other projects, but then the changes started. Slowly at first, the first few weeks, my muscles and bones felt sore, but I blamed the soreness on stress and lack of sleep. But then I began growing. My shoulders had widened, my legs and arms lengthened, my hands and feet became longer and thinner. Soon, my clothes did not fit anymore. I bought a tape measure and began measuring myself every morning. I grew from 6'1" to 6'2" to 6'3". No matter how much I ate, I was horribly hungry. I could not eat cooked food either. Even the smell of it made me gag. All I could eat was raw meat. Then, 3 months after whatever Chazakiel did to me, wings began to grow from my back. They were small at first, but as they grew in size, they became difficult to hide under my jacket. I thought about calling Jose's daughter, but I did not know what to tell her. That I had found the angel and freed him. But then he had made me an angel too. Cursed me just like he had cursed Threll. I kept trying to call Reed. I wanted to tell him what was happening to me. I wanted to warn him, but he would not answer his phone. Then I saw Reed on TV, talking to a reporter. He looked different than he had before. He looked healthy and strong now. All his hair had grown back. He told the reporter he had just launched a new genetics company. He had taken an interest in genome editing technology like CRISPR. He was going to use his fortune to fund research that would explore how to unlock the true potential of human DNA. He would continue Threll's work on Project Nephilim. I went to the bathroom and took off my shirt. I barely recognized myself anymore. My ribs pressed through my skin. My flesh had become pale white, and the wings on my back. I opened them and let them fill the bathroom. Then I closed them again, and I put my shirt back on. I looked at my reflection one last time, and I wondered what I was becoming. Story 4. I don't remember falling asleep. One moment there was nothing, and then my eyes were open, and it was already there. No warning, no sound, no slow crawl into wakefulness, just darkness. And then something inside the darkness that had no right to be anywhere at all. It had no shape, not really. It was more like the idea of shape, something that kept reaching toward form and then pulling back before it could commit. It moved the way water moves when you spill it on a flat surface, spreading out in all directions at once, finding its own edges, then folding back into itself like it was embarrassed by what it had almost become. There was a rhythm to it, slow and steady and deeply wrong, as though it was breathing, though it had nothing to breathe with, no lungs, no chest, no body to rise and fall. Faces kept appearing across its surface, or something close to faces. They rose up out of the mass the way shapes rise out of clouds, almost convincing, almost real, and then they softened and melted back down before you could be sure of what you had seen. Some of them were rough and half-formed, just vague suggestions of features that never quite lined up, but others were startlingly precise, nearly finished, as though whatever this thing was had practiced this particular arrangement of shapes before and almost had it right. You could see the intention behind them, almost cheeks, something that functioned like a brow, a curve that wanted to be a jaw, teeth that were definitely teeth, arranged in something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite anything else. It shifted the way a shadow of a four-dimensional object might shift if such a thing could cast a shadow into our world at all. Always moving, always on the edge of becoming something recognizable, and always dissolving before it got there. The movement was quiet. There was no noise associated with any of it. The whole thing existed in a kind of perfect, impossible silence. My body understood before my mind did. My breath shortened on its own. My heart knocked hard once inside my chest, then settled into something fast and careful. It wasn't panic exactly. It was older than panic. It was the kind of response that lives in the part of you that existed before language, before thought, before any of the things that make you feel like a person. It was the body saying, without words, that it was standing in front of something it was never supposed to see, and that every instinct it had was now paying very close attention. And still, I didn't look away. I couldn't at first, but then, as the seconds passed, I realized I didn't want to. There was something pulling at me that was stronger than the fear, something that felt almost like hunger, the kind of curiosity that doesn't care about consequences, that just needs to know, that would trade almost anything for one more moment of understanding. I studied it. I watched every ripple that passed through it, every fragment of a face that surfaced and sank. I tried to hold each one in my mind long enough to understand what I was seeing. Some of them stayed longer than others, before the mass took them back. Two tiny eyes appeared somewhere near what might have been the center, small and distant, blinking slowly, like stars seen through deep water. Half of a grin showed up just below them, mismatched, paired with two patches of absolute nothing where eyes should have been. A kind of presence moved through the whole thing that felt like grief, though there was nothing to grieve with, no features to show grief, no posture to suggest it. I only knew it because I felt it, the way you sometimes feel something in a room that you can't explain and can't shake. Then it communicated with me, not with words, not with sound. There was no voice, no vibration in the air, nothing that touched my ears. It was more like a thought that appeared fully formed inside my head, a piece of knowledge that simply existed where a moment before there had been nothing. It didn't feel foreign, exactly. It felt like remembering something I hadn't known I'd forgotten, like the answer to a question rising up from somewhere very deep. In that single impression, I understood what it was. It was something built out of the unconscious mind, out of the folded, layered, wordless part of thinking that exists below everything else. It knew this about itself. It had no confusion about its own nature. It had no name, because names require someone to give them, and it had never needed one. It had no purpose beyond existing in this particular moment, in this particular space between sleep and waking. It had no hunger, no drive, no need that required satisfying. It existed only because I was there to observe it. And it understood, with a kind of perfect clarity that carried no bitterness, that when I stopped observing it, it would stop existing. And then, still without words, it asked me something. I can't fully explain the way this happened, because the asking and the answering seemed to occur simultaneously, both of them happening inside my own thoughts, as though the question and its answer had always been the same piece of information waiting to be recognized. Are you afraid? Why do you not turn away? I stayed with that for a moment. The silence between my heartbeats felt very long. I looked at this formless, shifting, dying thing, and I tried to find an honest answer. Nothing clever came, nothing complicated, just the simplest, most obvious thing. Because I am human. I know. That was all it said in return. Not warmly, not coldly, just as a statement of fact, as though it was confirming something it had already understood. It hadn't revealed itself because it wanted to be figured out. It hadn't put on this slow, painful display of almost faces because it was searching for interpretation or meaning. It had no message to deliver, no warning to give, no mystery it needed solved. It just wanted to be seen. It wanted to exist in front of something that was alive, something that had eyes and a heart, and the capacity to register its presence. That was the whole of it. That was everything it had ever wanted or needed, if wanting and needing are even the right words for what something like this could experience. I stayed with it. I didn't move. I didn't speak for a while. I just watched it the way you might sit with someone who doesn't need you to say anything, who just needs to know you're there. And as I watched, something in my understanding shifted, just slightly. I couldn't have explained it logically, but I felt, with a kind of quiet certainty, that this thing did not want to stop existing. Not desperately, not in a way that caused it suffering, but the way any presence, however small, however brief, however formless, leans ever so slightly toward continuity, simply because it is. I spoke out loud, even though words felt strange in my mouth too, solid, too shaped for the moment I was in. I told it that it would be okay. I told it that we have to die too. What happened next wasn't a response to what I'd said. It wasn't comfort received or reassurance accepted. It was simply the process of what was always going to happen. moving forward in its own time. The mass slowed down, the constant shifting, all that restless searching for shape, began to lose its urgency. The faces stopped rising and falling as quickly. The whole thing seemed to settle, not into stillness exactly, but into something approaching it. And then it began to fade. Not all at once, not dramatically. It didn't collapse or scatter or tear apart. It just became less. Gradually, quietly, at its own pace. It shrank, it dimmed. The edges of it softened until they were indistinguishable from the darkness around them, and then even the center of it began to go, pulling away from my field of vision the way something slides into a blind spot. Not disappearing so much as moving beyond the reach of perception. The darkness lightened at the edges of my vision. A thin gray light crept in from the sides, the kind of light that comes just before full waking, when the room begins to reassemble itself around you and the night starts to lift. And then it was gone. No trace of it in the room, no residue in the air, only the high, faint ringing in my ears that is always there when everything else goes quiet, steady, and familiar, and entirely ordinary. I lay there for a while without moving. I don't know how long. The room came back to me slowly, the ceiling, the walls, the sounds of the world outside beginning to stir. And I thought about what I had just seen, or dreamed, or experienced in whatever space exists between those two things. If it had anything resembling a desire, I believed it was this: to be remembered, not for what it had done, because it had done nothing, not for what it had meant, because it had meant nothing in the way that things usually mean things, just to be remembered the way living things want to be remembered, simply for having been here at all, for having existed, however briefly, however strangely, in the small and flickering light of someone else's awareness. I remember it. Story 5. I used to believe that there was a menacing figure that lurked outside my window as a kid. It would only be there in the summers, when I was staying in the family's duct-taped-together trailer deep in the woods of Wisconsin. I never feared its presence in the heart of Chicago when the winters were harsh and grueling, but there in the woods, when the summers were hot and sticky, I would watch the windows with growing unease. When a storm would come and the patter of the rain would boom against the roof, threatening to come down on me, I would see a figure in the distance, just past the campground's swaying wire fence, separating the deep woods from us. It would stand there perfectly still, cloaked in leaves and mud, dirt running down its face in rivulets. It would stare back at me with unblinking eyes. At 21 years of age, I decided to move into that little trailer to spend my summer away from college. During the days, I would work at the campground, fixing up the rundown areas torn up by age and neglect, before coming back to the trailer and doing the same thing, except always with a beer in hand. When I would stand on the roof of the trailer as it creaked beneath me, sweeping the branches and leaves that had fallen on it from previous storms, I would look out into the woods. There, in the far distance, it would linger just beyond the tree line. Frowning as I brought the beer to my lips, I could make out its twisted form. As the long, hot days of summer went on, it never left, just watching. I would toast it with whatever drink I had that day, and it would raise a twisted arm back to me, as if telling me to enjoy myself while I still could. On the days where I came home after a long night turned to morning, it would stand at the window, waiting for me, crying while I screamed about the way my life was turning out, about all my failures and mistakes. I would slam the blinds shut, and it would move to the next window, then the next, until all I could hear was its whimpers outside my thin trailer walls, like an animal in pain. Towards the end of the summer, as my drinking got worse and worse, it grew closer, never leaving the window, as though it were lying in wait, until I stumbled out of my car one night, shutting the lights off and killing the ignition with fumbling hands. I tripped walking in the door, slamming my head onto the dirtied floor, and instead of entering fully, I just laid there, half in and half out, too exhausted and drunk to care. It is time. You know that. The voice came from behind me, but I could not bring myself to turn around. No. How miserable must you get? It asked, voice coming in short, raspy breaths like a smoker at the end of his rope, each word painful and labored. I do not want to stop, but I also do not want to live like this, I told it, attempting to suck my legs in from the outside where they dangled. The time is here. You are miserable enough. Softly, with a whimper, as my knees smacked painfully into the frame. What if I am not, though? What if I just get worse? What if this is not rock bottom yet? You have nothing left to lose by trying, it snapped out harshly, its patience finally wearing thin. I did not respond as I managed to get my legs inside, sprawling my battered body on the floor beneath me. I did not close the door behind me when I woke the next morning, sun beaming mercilessly onto my bruised legs, clutching my head away from the light that felt like daggers in my skull. I would wonder why I never closed the door. The figure was gone from the window for the first time in months. The woods beyond the fence were empty, no twisted shape lurking between the trees. No mud-covered face staring back at me, just the normal morning sounds of birds and wind through the leaves. I pulled myself up from the floor, my body protesting with every movement. The trailer was a disaster. Empty beer cans littered every surface. The sink was piled with dirty dishes I had not touched in weeks. The air inside was stale and reeked of alcohol and sweat. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. My eyes were bloodshot and hollow. My face was gaunt and pale despite spending all summer in the sun. I had lost weight I could not afford to lose. There were bruises on my arms and legs that I could not remember getting. You are miserable enough, the voice had said. I thought about that all morning as I cleaned up the trailer. I filled trash bag after trash bag with empty bottles and cans. I opened every window to let in fresh air. I scrubbed the dishes and wiped down the counters. By afternoon, I had made a decision. I drove into town and found the small community center that I had passed dozens of times, but never entered. Inside, there was a meeting happening. People sitting in a circle, drinking coffee from styrofoam cups, talking about their struggles with addiction. I stood in the doorway for a long time, debating whether to go in or leave. Then I thought about the figure in the woods, the way it had watched me spiral downward all summer, the way it had cried outside my windows, the way it had finally spoken to me when I was at my lowest point. I walked into the room and found an empty chair. That was 5 years ago. I still go back to that trailer sometimes, during the summers. I fixed it up properly now, replaced the duct tape with actual repairs, put in new windows that seal properly, painted the exterior, and reinforced the roof. Sometimes, late at night when I am sitting on the porch with a glass of water, I look out toward the woods. The fence is still there, swaying slightly in the breeze. The trees beyond it are dark and deep, and sometimes, just sometimes, I think I see a figure standing there in the distance. But it is different now. It does not cry anymore. It does not look miserable or twisted. It just stands there, and when I raise my glass of water toward it, it raises a hand back, not in warning this time, in acknowledgement. I think it was waiting all those years, waiting for me to get miserable enough to finally ask for help, waiting for me to hit a bottom low enough that the only direction left was up. Some people have guardian angels. I had something else, something that looked horrifying and spoke in harsh rasps, something that scared me as a child and haunted me as an adult. But it was there when I needed it most, when I was lying half in and half out of that trailer, too drunk to even close the door behind me. It told me the truth I needed to hear. You have nothing left to lose by trying. It was right. I had everything to gain. The figure has not appeared to me in over a year now. I like to think it is because it knows I am okay, that I am going to stay okay, that I do not need it to watch over me anymore. But on nights when I feel the old temptations creeping back, when I smell beer at a barbecue or see a liquor store and feel that familiar pull, I think about it standing there in the rain and mud. I think about how it cried for me when I could not cry for myself. And I remember that I am miserable enough. I do not need to go back to find out if it can get worse, because it can always get worse, but it can also get better. I chose better, and somewhere out there in the Wisconsin woods, cloaked in leaves and mud, I think something that was never quite human and never quite a monster is satisfied with that choice. I never did close the door that night, but the next morning when I woke up with the sun burning my bruised legs and my head pounding, the door was closed. I did not close it, but something did. Story 6. I'm 24 years old now. A grown man who stopped checking under his bed for monsters somewhere around the age of 12, who learned to laugh at horror movies instead of covering his eyes, who built a comfortable, rational life on the foundation of not believing in things that can't be explained. I've had years to talk myself out of a lot of things, but there is one memory from my childhood that my brain has never been able to fully dissolve, no matter how many times it has tried. It sits there like a splinter buried just deep enough that you can't get a grip on it, irritating and persistent, and absolutely refusing to go away. My mind has spent a long time presenting me with alternatives. It was a dream. You were half asleep. You were 10 years old and your imagination was running wild, but no amount of reasonable explanation has ever been able to fully shake that feeling, that specific, physical, bone-deep feeling of terror that moved through my entire body in a single cold wave. That kind of fear doesn't come from dreams. I've had dreams. I know what they feel like. This was something else. I was 10 years old that summer. My parents had signed me up for a sleepaway camp out in the woods, one of those standard, perfectly ordinary summer programs that millions of kids go to every year. A few weeks away from home, some fresh air, some activities, some new friends. Nothing about the camp itself was unusual or interesting or worth mentioning. It was completely unremarkable in every way, which is part of what makes what happened so hard to set aside. Strange things are supposed to happen in strange places, This was not a strange place. It was a completely normal summer camp in the woods, full of normal kids doing normal things. It was around the fourth day. We'd had a good one, the kind of summer day that feels almost endless when you're 10. All running and heat and noise, and the particular exhaustion that comes from using your body all day in ways your body actually enjoys. When lights out came, everyone scattered to their cabins without much argument. We were all genuinely tired. My bed was positioned right next to the window, which I had thought was a nice spot when I first arrived. A little breeze, something to look at, some connection to the outside. That night, it felt less like a nice spot and more like a curse. The mosquitoes were relentless. I lay there in the heavy, warm air of the cabin, completely unable to sleep, swatting at the constant whining sound near my ears every few minutes. The room was stuffy and close, the way rooms get when too many sleeping bodies fill a small space, and the mosquitoes seemed to find me specifically, ignoring everyone else and treating me like I was the only option available. After a while, I stopped being annoyed and just settled into a strange, bored kind of acceptance. I started killing them one by one and lining up the small flat bodies on the windowsill in a neat row, which is exactly the kind of odd, methodical little ritual that a bored 10-year-old invents in the dark when there is nothing else to do. It was mindless and faintly satisfying, and it eventually did what lying still and closing my eyes hadn't managed. Somewhere after finishing my strange little collection of dead bugs arranged in a tidy line on the sill, I drifted off. I didn't wake up gradually. There was no slow surfacing, no groggy blinking, no gentle transition from sleep to wakefulness. One moment I was completely under, and the next I was completely awake, sitting bolt upright, with every nerve in my body firing at once. The feeling that woke me wasn't a sound or a movement or anything I could point to and name. It was a wave of dread so sudden and so overwhelming that it felt physical, like something had reached into my chest and squeezed. Ice moved through my whole body from the inside. My skin went cold. My heart was already going hard and fast before my eyes had even fully adjusted to the dark. The cabin was completely silent. All the other kids were still asleep, their breathing slow and even in the darkness around me. No one else had felt anything. Whatever had pulled me up out of sleep like that had only come for me. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, everything had changed completely from how it had looked when I fell asleep. The camp courtyard, which I had been looking at all day, which I knew perfectly well, was gone. In its place was fog, not the thin, wispy kind that drifts across fields on cool mornings and burns off by 9. This was something else entirely. This was a fog so thick and so dense that it looked almost solid. The kind of fog you don't see very often in real life because most people go their whole lives without encountering it. It sat over everything like a held breath, swallowing the shapes of trees and buildings and fences, turning the familiar grounds of the camp into something formless and deep and wrong. And something was moving inside it. I saw it before I understood what I was seeing, the way your eyes register movement before your brain has caught up. Something was crossing the courtyard. It had a shape that was almost human, a silhouette that suggested the outline of a person, but it was hazy and semi-transparent, like a figure seen through layers of frosted glass. Around it, or part of it, there was something that billowed and spread as it moved, something like an enormous cloak or a mass of dark fabric that flowed behind and around it in a way that didn't quite follow the rules of how fabric moves. But the thing that my brain absolutely could not process, the thing that has stayed with me with perfect clarity for 14 years, was the color. It glowed, not with reflected light, not with anything that could be explained by a flashlight or a lantern or any ordinary source. It produced its own light from within, and that light was green. Not a soft green, not a natural chemical toxic green, the kind of color that exists in warning signs and in nightmares, a piercing, vibrating color that cuts straight through the dense wall of fog, as though the fog wasn't there at all. It was vivid in a way that felt aggressive, in a way that felt wrong at a level below conscious thought, the way certain colors in the natural world signal danger to the animal brain without requiring any intellectual interpretation. And it moved completely wrong. That is the part that is hardest to describe, and the part that my rational adult mind keeps snagging on when it tries to find a clean explanation for what I saw. Because people run. I know what running looks like. I've seen thousands of people run. This was not running. This thing covered ground the way running covers ground, quickly, with direction and intention. But none of the mechanics were right. There was no impact, no rise and fall, no sense of weight pressing down onto the earth with each stride. It moved the way something moves when gravity is a suggestion rather than a law, skimming just above the surface of the ground, swift and smooth and entirely weightless. It floated forward through the thick green-lit fog with a kind of terrible ease. And then it reached the camp fence. The fence was high. I don't remember the exact measurement, but I remember it being tall enough that it felt significant, tall enough that it served its actual purpose of keeping a boundary. This thing cleared it without slowing down, without gathering itself, without any visible effort at all. It went over like the fence was a line drawn on paper, like height was simply not a relevant factor for whatever physical rules governed its movement. One moment it was on one side, and then it was rising, and then it was gone, swallowed by the fog and the darkness beyond the boundary of the camp. I watched it for about 10 seconds in total, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Time is strange when your body is in that state of pure animal shock. My 10-year-old brain simply refused to do anything useful with what my eyes were sending it. There was no category for this. There was no drawer to put it in, no familiar shape to match it against, no prior experience that made it make sense. I just stared at the empty fog where it had been, and my body stayed completely rigid. And somewhere deep in whatever part of me handles things that are too large to process consciously, something made a decision. I shut down. That is the only way I can describe it. Not a slow winding down, not a gradual relaxation as the fear passed. A hard stop, like a switch being thrown. I dropped back onto my pillow, and I was asleep before I had finished falling. A heavy, deep, sealed kind of sleep that had no dreams in it at all. Morning came the way mornings always came at camp, with noise and light and the sounds of other kids moving around. But when I opened my eyes, the first thing I felt was not the ordinary freshness of a new day. There was a weight sitting on my chest that had nothing to do with how rested I was. A heaviness, a kind of residue left behind by something that didn't belong. The feeling you carry when you have seen something you were not supposed to see, something that exists outside the boundaries of what human eyes are meant to encounter. I don't know how else to put it. It just felt like a violation of some unspoken rule, like I had looked through a window I should have walked past. I don't remember whether I told anyone. I probably didn't. The logic of being 10 years old is very clear on that point. Nobody was going to believe me. The counselors would smile and nod and say something reassuring. The other kids might laugh, or worse, they'd be scared too, and somehow that felt like it would make it more real, in a way I wasn't ready for. So I think I just carried it quietly and let the day fill up around it the way days do, and let the noise and activity slowly push it to the back. But it never left. Not really. It has been 14 years, and that image is still there with a clarity that ordinary memories don't have. That specific green glow cutting through the fog, that wrongness of movement, that fence cleared without effort or weight. I can see it as clearly now as I could the morning after, which is not how childhood memories usually work. Most things from when I was 10 have gone soft at the edges, blurred, condensed into feelings more than pictures. This one has not softened at all. I'm a rational person. I work, I pay bills, I have a life that operates entirely within the world of explainable things. But I have never been able to find an explanation that actually satisfies me. Not for the way it moved, not for that color, not for the cold wave of dread that pulled me out of sleep a full moment before I even looked at the window, as though some part of me already knew. And now, whenever the weather turns and the fog comes in thick outside my window, I don't stand there and look at it the way I might have before. I walk over to the window and I pull the curtains closed, and I don't examine too carefully why I feel the need to do it. I just do it, and I don't look.